Hi, this is Andre. I want to talk about the Stutter Interface Mode and the Quantized Overdub hack on the Echoplex Digital Pro. Thank you very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this one. We've talked about Stutter Mode quite a while ago because it's one of the things I use the most on the EDP. I would say I use Stutter about 95% of the time, and Stutter is one of the interface modes. You access interface modes by coming down to the bottom parameter row under the record column, and it's one of 4 interface modes that are available by default: loop, delay, expert, and stutter. The way that I tend to use Stutter Mode has to do with how it affects a couple of different insert modes, and I went into that in a lot of detail in a previous video, which I will link to in the descriptions of this video. We're not going to talk about that in this video because there are other things you can do with Stutter Mode that are more immediately related to the interface modes that we've been talking about. This video is going to focus on how Stutter uses feedback, both with and without an external pedal plugged in, and how using a pedal or hacking the EDP to make it think that it has a pedal lets you get a quantized overdub kind of technique. So let's talk about feedback in the most basic sense in Stutter Mode. It functions like a lot of other interface modes in as much as you record something, and if feedback is all the way up, then it repeats infinitely until you bring feedback down. Close overdub. I don't have anything plugged into the feedback pedal jack in back, so that means that right now feedback is controlled by the front panel knob. As I bring feedback down, you can hear that the loop starts fading out. You can add more layers on top. Volume up. Like that, you can bring feedback all the way down for 0 feedback, so you only get 1 repetition of everything you play. And you can do fades within a loop itself to get volume swells, like that. This is stuff we've talked about in past videos. It's not something you necessarily have to know about already, but this is material that has been pretty well documented by our videos in the past. So this is what Stutter Mode does with feedback if you don't have a pedal plugged into the rear panel feedback jack. Let's plug a pedal into the rear panel feedback jack. So here's my cable. This is me trying not to fall over in my advancing years as I plug the cable in. You heard the little pop there as the cable made the connection, and here is a volume pedal. You need a passive volume pedal to plug in to the rear panel feedback jack. And now this pedal is controlling feedback. And you can hear that fade got imposed. So you can use the feedback pedal in Stutter Mode, much as you would use the front panel knob. Volume up, Andre. There's that dirty volume pop. And you can impose the fades. I've called this the soft replace technique. You can bring it all the way down. This is 0 feedback. Let's bring it up about halfway. So you get a gradual decay. And bring it back up to 100% feedback. Now let's quickly review the substitute insert mode. It's accessed under the second row from the bottom under the insert column, and I'm going to unplug the volume pedal for just a second for reasons that will become clear shortly. I'm going to set up a loop. I'm going to play a note. Exit overdub, and now I'm going to press substitute. I'm not going to play anything on the guitar while I do this. I'm just going to press the button. So I was overwriting the content in the loop with whatever was being played, and since I wasn't playing anything, we get silence. Now if you notice, you don't hear the change until the next time the loop spins around. So all those little stuttery, glitchy things, you don't hear them as they're being played. Let me do a little more with some actual live input playing. So there I held it down for the length of the entire loop, so we get that one drone. Now I'm going to play stuff on top of that. So it's that kind of idea. You overwrite the content. It's very similar to the replace function, but you don't hear the change immediately. With replace, you hear it as soon as you press the button. With substitute, you don't hear it as it's happening. You hear it the next go around. So with all that said, now I'm going to plug the volume pedal back in. Now I'm going to record a new loop from scratch. Now I'm going to exit overdub and press the substitute button. And I'm not hearing any change. Why is that? That's because when you have something plugged into the feedback pedal jack, then the front panel feedback knob becomes a substitute level knob. Right now, feedback is all the way up. It's at 100%. That means that when we use substitute, we don't actually hear anything being overwritten. If I play live input stuff, you can hear that the note that I played is getting dropped in there for however long I held the button down, but it's not overwriting that lower note that was already there. It's basically being overdubbed on top of it. The reason is that when you're in stutter mode and you have an external pedal plugged into the rear panel feedback jack, the feedback knob becomes a balance control for the substitute function. Right now it's all the way to the right, which means that it's not overriding any of the loop. If I turn it all the way to the left, now it will overwrite content in the loop, but because it's substitute, you won't hear it until the next go round. So here we go. Substitute, release. There we go. And if you notice, as soon as I press it down, the display very quickly goes down from 127 to 0. And when I release it, it jumps back up to 127. That's indicating feedback. So it's going from maximum feedback to 0 feedback. Now I'm playing live input on the guitar, and you'll be able to tell on the video when I'm playing live input because that light will light up like that. So now the substitute button is completely overriding whatever was in the loop with whatever I'm playing. And again, if I play silence, then you punch holes in it. Bring feedback back up to 100%, and it basically becomes an overdub function. If I play a single note and hold the button down for a long time, it's just going to be a long overdub. So nothing got covered up underneath that new note. So if you've dealt with quantization in the EDP, you can probably guess where we're going with this. Quantization will map certain functions to different parts of the loop. The quantized replace technique or the quantized substitute technique has to do with quantizing replace or substitute to whatever the 8th per cycle value is. Right now, the 8th per cycle is 8, and we are quantized to 8th. So I'm going to turn feedback all the way to the left. That means that we're going to completely overwrite whatever is in the loop when we do substitute. And now, I'm playing notes with the left hand. So that kind of thing. That's the quantized substitute or quantized replace technique. Now let's bring feedback all the way up. That means we're not going to overwrite any content in the loop when we use substitute, but because we're using substitute and not overdub, it's still going to be subject to quantization. I'm going to record a new loop just so we can be really clear about what's happening. Let's do a new drone. Okay, exit overdub, enter substitute. And you can hear that the overdubs, if you want to call them that, the new notes that are being added in aren't covering up anything that was already in the loop. There's no overwriting going on. because substitute feedback is up to 100%. So you're still getting these scientifically precise, inhumanly perfect step sequencer style quantized additions to the note, but they're not overriding anything. So it's basically a quantized overdub kind of sound. Let's do a little more of that. So it's a different kind of thing because you're not overriding stuff, so you still get this gradually increasing density of sound. If I bring feedback all the way to the left, now it is going to overwrite whatever I'm playing, and you're going to hear that's going to be a very different kind of effect. So it's a much more kind of punchy sound. We're overwriting instead of overdubbing. Now, you may be wondering, if feedback knob all the way to the right is 0 overwriting, and if feedback knob all the way to the left is 100% overwriting, what happens if it's in the middle? Great question. Let's find out. I'm going to play another drone, because I'm playing another drone. Overdub off. Let's put the feedback knob about halfway. My poor feedback knob has been lost in the midst of time and many, many travels and tours and gigs. So I am just going to press down the substitute button. I'm not going to play anything. Let's hear what happens. There, you can hear that the volume dropped, but you can still hear the loop underneath. I'm going to turn Quantize off for right now. So you're not punching silence in it, you're punching level reductions in it. Let's record a new loop again. And again, you can see how much we're reducing it by the number that's displayed when you press it down. So I'm going to do a few different levels. This is a little higher. I'm going to play a different note. So it's not completely overriding the stuff underneath. Let's do something that's all the way to the right, which means there won't be any overriding. It will just be an overdub. Now let's do complete overriding, bringing it all the way to the left. And if you hold it down for the length of the entire loop, you can completely overwrite the loop with whatever you're playing. Like so. Let's bring it to an intermediate level. Let's bring it a little higher. Just for contrast, let's completely override, bring it all the way up to the right. So now that's overdubbing because it's all the way to the right. So nothing is getting overwritten. These are basically overdubs that are happening. Now let's bring it all the way to the left. And now this will completely overwrite whatever's in the loop. And let's record one more loop from scratch. Let's do a drone on a note I haven't played yet. Let's turn Quantize on. Let's bring the front panel feedback knob all the way to the right. And now we're going to get the quantized overdub effect. So nothing is getting overwritten. This is basically the same thing as overdubbing, except that with regular overdub, you can't quantize it. Overdub does not respond to quantization, but Substitute does. And if you have an external pedal plugged in and feedback is all the way up on the front panel knob, then you can get a quantized overdub. And then the pedal still controls feedback. So if you want to do some fading or reducing or feedback playing, you can still do that. And this has nothing to do with substitute, overwriting, or anything like this. This is just garden variety feedback. Now, let's talk about how you can hack this so that you can get the quantized overdub effect without actually having to plug a volume pedal in there. You can use any kind of mono instrument cable. I'm just using a very short quarter-to-quarter cable here. I am unplugging the volume pedal. I am plugging one of these ends into the rear panel feedback jack input. I am leaving the other end dangling in midair. So I can't control feedback with the pedal anymore because the pedal is no longer plugged in. But what I can do is get a quantized overdub effect happening. So even though there's no actual pedal plugged in, the EDP treats that, I guess you could call it a dummy input, as if there is a pedal plugged in. Which means we can still get the quantized overdub effect without having a pedal plugged in. There it is. I'm going to increase the 1/8 per cycle value to something faster. And again, the thing to listen for with quantized overdub, if you hear that really low note that I originally overdubbed, that's not getting overwritten at any point. There's no point where that's being cut out. To contrast, let's do cut it out. Let's bring the front panel feedback knob all the way to the left. Now I'm going to do the same thing. The substitute is still going to get quantized, but you're going to hear that there are going to be holes in the loop from where the previous content was being overwritten. There we go. And if I just do silence, that kind of idea. Oh, I like that. That's going somewhere. All right. So this is really good if you're somebody like me who historically does not drag an analog volume pedal to gigs when I play. I probably should because there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it with regards to interface modes. And my favorite interface mode is actually yet to be discussed in these videos. We're going to get to it soon. It's flip mode and it's fantastic. So I should get into the habit of bringing one of these along. But for people like myself who are not in the habit, who want to get the quantized overdub effect happening, you don't have to plug a pedal in. You just need to plug some kind of 1/4" input in there, like that. Note, please, that as soon as I remove that from the rear panel feedback jack, that it defaulted to the front panel controlling feedback. And since the feedback knob was all the way to the left, that meant that feedback went to 0. So, something to be aware of. And finally, let's say you want to use the quantized overdub technique, but you either cannot or will not bring an analog volume pedal to plug into the rear panel feedback jack. MIDI to the rescue. So here is our cable. I'm going to treat this as a dummy input for the rear panel feedback jack input. I'm not making any judgments about this cable's intelligence. It's just a figure of speech. All right. Record loop. Play music into the loop. Do the quantized overdub technique because the feedback front knob is all the way forward and we have a dummy input on the rear panel feedback jack. All right. And if we want to reduce feedback, I have this pedal on my MIDI pedal board, controlled to feedback, bring it down, and feedback is getting reduced. So I can do the classic fade out old layers while playing new ones. I can do the not so classic but should be a classic soft replace stuff by imposing swells. I can go the really needs to be classic, zero feedback. All that good stuff. All right. So this has been a look at the Stutter Interface Mode and the rear panel feedback jack hack for the Quantized Overdub technique. Wow. Thank you to Mark Oswald for commissioning this and giving me an excuse to say this ridiculous stuff. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye.